of marriage. And what I did is, as we get started here, I've just got some slides I found on the internet that do a good job kind of describing different aspects of marriage. So we're just going to read them together. Here's just a couple of them. Here's the first one about marriage. It says, if you're wrong and you shut up, you're wise. Okay? If you're right and you shut up, you're married. All right? That's a truth you need to take to heart. All right, here's the next one. If you think women are the weaker sex, try pulling the blankets back to your side. How many of you experienced that one? It's like, yeah, and then if you wake them up, you're going to be in trouble. All right, here we go. Next one. Marriage is like a deck of cards. In the beginning, all you need is 2 hearts and a diamond. By the end, you wish you had a club and a spade. I thought that was pretty good. That was pretty funny. Not saying that's how marriage really is. It's just funny. All right, here we go. Next one. A husband is someone who, after taking the trash out, gives you the impression you just cleaned the whole house. I can say I admit to that one. It's like, I took the garbage out. Look at that. All right, here we go. Next one. When you say married couple walking down the street, the one that's a few steps ahead is the one that's mad. That's very true. So when you see the couple separated, whoever's out front, you know is the mad one because they have energy, so they're walking it off, and the other one's behind just like, do. All right. Those are just a few slides, just kind of give you a brief understanding of marriage a little bit, but we are continuing our Get Real series where we're looking at what real Christianity looks like in everyday life. And as I've been saying, I think we have gotten to a point in Christianity in America where we have lost the real simplicity and the beauty of what being a Christian was supposed to be. We have turned it into a bunch of lists, a bunch of things that we are constantly trying to implement into our lives instead of pursuing Jesus Christ with a love relationship. So what we've done is we have turned it kind of into an academic pursuit where we learn information and we keep trying to implement this information into our lives, but we forget the pursuit of love that Jesus actually intended us to have. And here's the problem that I keep talking about. When your Christian faith becomes an academic pursuit, what happens is it becomes a chore. What happens is it just becomes a list, and what happens among this is this. When you have an academic pursuit, your heart doesn't change. All you get is a bunch of knowledge in your head, and that's not what God desires. What God desires for you is to have a pursuit of love of Him. And when you have a pursuit of love, what naturally happens in any pursuit of love is it changes your heart, it changes who you are, and in your relationship with God, it will change the rest of your life. So God desires us to have a pursuit of love, not just a pursuit of academic exercises. So today, we're going to get real with marriage. We're going to talk about what real marriage looks like and what God expects from it. Now, if you listen to, as I referred last week and this week, I'll call them the super Christians, okay? What I mean by that is this. It's the people that get up and try to tell you being a Christian, everything goes right, everything's wonderful, and life's just donuts and pop, okay? Everything's wonderful, it's all good. And the super Christians will get up and tell you how great they are and all the stuff they do. And you sit there out there as the audience and you listen to it and you go, man, I'm so far away from God. My life is such a mess compared to them, and they just have it all together. And so I call them the super Christians because most of what they tell you is fake. But when they talk about marriage, what the super Christians will do is usually they sit up on stage, and it's usually the minister and his wife, and they usually sit in like those high-top chairs, and they sit close to each other. And it goes something like this when they talk about their marriage. They will talk about how they're a team. And they're a team, and they work together on everything, and they're just a great team. And they'll sit there, and they'll keep talking about how much they love each other, and they'll fawn over each other. Then they will talk about how they have conflict at times, but they always talk it through, within that day, and they get the conflict moved on, and everything works out really well. And then they'll talk about, many times, they'll talk about how they're married to their best friend, and they'll give you that whole line. And then they'll talk about, or what you'll see them do is, oftentimes during this talk, they'll give the adoring smile to each other. We'll see them look at each other and be like, they got the glimmer in their eyes, and they look at each other, and they give you that glimmer. They'll talk about how God made them for each other, and God brought them together, and they're just the perfect made individuals for each other that God created. And then they'll talk about how they're continually growing through the years, and things just keep getting better and better, and they're just always a growth track, and everything's just always going well. And here's the thing. That makes for a really nice and sweet morning presentation, but most of it's fake. okay? In all honesty, most of it's fake. And here's how I know most of it's fake. Most of these people I've seen do on TV, you find out 2 years later are divorced, and you're going, okay, yeah, that was nice that you gave those speeches. You remember like their little marriage things. But most of it's fake. We also grow up with movies. Two of them that have been out more in the last, 7 or 8 years. The Notebook, Steven's favorite. Yep. The Notebook. You have the movie like Up. If you remember Up in the first 10 minutes of Up, and then later through Up, like his whole pursuit of her and kind of remembering her and all. And we get these fantasies of what marriage is like, and they're intently in love, and everything's just been that way their whole entire relationship, and things are great. But you have to remember this. They're just movies. They're not real. So this morning, we're going to get real about marriage. And here's what's real about marriage. Marriage isn't easy, okay? It requires work, and it requires effort. Marriage will have struggles, and it will have trials, and it will have many of those as you go through your married life. Every marriage is different, which is also hard when you're talking about marriage, because all of our marriages are different from each other. There are no two marriages that are exactly the same. So the one thing that works in one marriage doesn't always work in another marriage. And comparing your marriage to other marriages is not a fruitful exercise as well, because none are the same. And the other thing that makes it a little bit tricky is the Bible's fairly vague on the day-to-day relationship of a marriage. It does give us principles we're going to look at today that you can apply in several different ways. But on the day-to-day, we get very few glimpses scripturally of what a real marriage looks like. So, to start today, how we're going to do this is I'm going to tell you about my marriage. And I'm not a super Christian, and I apologize up front for you. I'm just not one of those guys. But how many of you, and this is usually we joke in here, usually we cut on me, and you make fun of me and make me cry in my heart about me and lower my self-esteem. But this question is a serious one real quick. Looking at the marriage I and Autumn have, how many of you would say we have a fairly successful marriage from your viewpoint? Those of you who've known us for the last 10 years. Okay, most of you, everybody has their hands up. I don't want to know who doesn't, so I'm not going to ask that question. So here's the thing. To be honest with you, Autumn and I have a horrible personality mix. We probably, from being a minister and counseling marriages and stuff, I would say we probably have one of the worst personality mixes you can have in marriage. And let me just tell you why. Here's some of our personality traits. Autumn is an introvert, okay? I'm not. I'm an extrovert. So I like being around people, talking to people. Autumn would rather just sit by herself and be introverted and read a book, take a bath or something. I'd rather be outside talking to people, okay? Autumn is a people pleaser. I just don't care, okay? So we have a bad mix that way. Autumn is a rule follower. I am you break the rules if you need to break the rules to get done what you want to get done. Not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's my personality, my natural personality trait. Autumn's a rule breaker. I don't really care what the speed limit is. I don't really care if that sign's up there telling you not to do that. I'm just going to do it and get it done with and all that. That makes some conflict in our marriage. Autumn is safe and calculating. I'm a risk taker. Okay? Total opposites on those. Autumn is a worrier. She'll worry about everything that can be worried about and think about everything that could be worried about. I am laid back and just go, it'll just take care of itself. It'll all work out. When you move houses like we've done, and we've moved from Owasso down to here, trust me, the worrying and the layback thing caused some issues, all right? Because she worried about everything that could go wrong. I'm just like, it'll all work out. Well, how do you know it's going to work out? I don't know. It's just going to work out. It's not that big of a deal. We'll just deal with it. Okay, those types of things. Autumn is private. I'm an open book. That's why I'm telling you this stuff up here. Those can lead to things. Now, because of our extreme personality differences, it leads to a lot of issues in our marriage, all right? Now, to be honest with you, we don't always like each other. There's a lot of times me and Autumn don't like each other. There are a lot of times we don't even love each other, all right? That we could both honestly say, I don't really love you, and she doesn't really love me. There are times that we don't want to talk to each other, and we will go days without talking to each other. Yes, Mom, I'm sorry, don't cry. That's what happens, okay? There are times that we yell at each other, okay? We have conflict and we will yell at each other. There are times that we say hurtful things to each other that are very hurtful that we say back and forth to each other. And in our darkest times, to be honest with you, we don't even want to be together. We have dark times where we just go, is it really worth keeping this thing together at times, all right? Now, at the same time, I will say this. There was no one else on this planet I would choose to live with and do life with other than Autumn. In spite of all those things, she would still be my first choice of the person that I would do life with and spend the rest of my life with. And the reason for that is we do have three things we share in common that I actually believe have allowed us to have a successful marriage, because in spite of all that stuff, we've also had a lot of good times over the last 20 years. Okay, we've had a lot of good moments. We still have a lot of good moments in our marriage, but we do have a lot of issues that come up that cause conflict. But we have a successful marriage. And here's the three things that we're unified on. Number one is this: we're both equally committed to God. If you talk to Autumn or you talk to me, you will know we are both Christ followers, and we are both committed to Christ more than we're committed to each other. That we are committed to Christ first, then we're committed to each other. The second thing is we're both committed to ministry through the local church. And if you watch both of us, you will notice both of us are hard workers, and we serve, and we do what God has called us to do, and we choose to do that through the local church. So Autumn, I don't think, is in here today because she's probably off serving somewhere in the kids' ministry. So we're both equally committed to serving God through his local church. And because of those first two things, we both understand we have no other options, okay? Because we're married. So no matter what situation we find ourselves in, we know we have to work through it, and we have to find a new path forward because we have no other options, because God comes number one in our relationship, which says, I can't just leave you. We're not just going to blow this thing up and walk away from each other. We're going to keep this thing together because we know that's what God desires for our life, and so we're going to work through it no matter how tough that is. Now, just so you know, I don't have Gideon in here today because I told him you can't come to the service. He's like, why not? And I'm like, I'm talking marriage. What's wrong with marriage? I just said, this isn't stuff for your kids to know. I'm telling you, and these kids can know all this stuff, but my kids don't need to know this, because as parents, if you have children, these are types of things you do behind closed doors, and you have this conflict between behind closed doors, not in front of your children all the time, because they don't need to see that. You don't need to make them insecure about their family environment. These are things that happen behind closed doors. So Gideon's upstairs helping the kids because he doesn't need to hear all the grueling details of our marriage, which is wonderful all the time. And we still have the sparkle in each other's eyes when we look at each other. But in all honesty, we do at times, but there's a lot of work that we have to do in our marriage as well. Understand this: there is a ton of Christian resources out there if you need serious help in your marriage. I just want to give you a few that are out there that I would recommend. These are not on your program, but if you would like to get them, write these down, because they're up on screen here. Write these down while they're up there. These are ones I would recommend, because I'm not going to go into huge detail today. I'm going to deal with more principles, but here's a few of them. Number one, the Love Dare. How many of you have used the Love Dare by Kendrick? Really? Only two of them. Okay. It's a book. What I would recommend here is if your marriage and you feel like your marriage is in dire straits, or if you're in a marriage relationship where you have your spouse has no desire to be part of the relationship, is kind of checked out, but you still want to have a marriage, this book's incredible for helping you know how to still go about your role as a spouse and how you can still be the person God called you to be, even if your spouse isn't on board. You are still called by God to be a certain individual and to live a certain way and to love your spouse the way God calls you to do. That book, The Love Dare, does an excellent job of helping you understand that and encouraging you through a really difficult time in marriage, okay? The other one, The 5 Love Languages. How many of you have read that or studied that? Okay, there's more of you know that one. That one's really good. The 5 Love Languages, kind of what it states is there's generally 5 ways people love and receive love. So it talks about what those 5 languages are, that all of us present love to other people one way, and we all receive certain types of love. But there's other types of love that we don't really care about, and it doesn't impact us. And it teaches you how to identify what you're good at giving and what you're good at receiving, and helping you understand that in your relationship. It would help a marriage relationship a lot, just understanding how to love each other better. The other one is a YouTube video. It's free of charge. You can get it on YouTube, and the thing you type in the search engine is A Tale of Two Brains, with the full or the name Mike Gunger or whatever. I've recommended this before. Probably the best marriage material stuff I've ever seen. And the full one, I think, totals like a 2-hour thing because it's several of his sessions together. But he's excellent. He makes it funny so even men will watch it. and stay through it because he makes it entertaining. But it's excellent stuff about how a woman's brain works and how a man's brain works. And it's great material. How many of you watched that when I recommended it before? Did anyone here watch it? Stephen, you weren't here. Matthew's. Okay, so you've watched it, college. John, you did a little bit. I would highly encourage you, if you get time, break it into some sections. It's great material. Some of the best stuff I've seen that you can get, and it's all on video. So those are the things I would recommend. But since we are in this Get Real series, where what I'm trying to do is simplify the Christian walk and simplify things down, I'm just going to deal with one scripture this morning that I think really lays out the foundational keys that a marriage needs to be built on to find success in a marriage that we see from scriptures. And it all comes from Ephesians chapter 5. And the Apostle Paul writes this, verse 31 through 33. And there are three key components in this that we can take from it. And what you'll find as we walk through it here in a minute is you only need to know two, because he gives a general one to both husband and wives. Then he gives one just to husbands and one to wives. So even though there's 3 points today, each of you only have two. Okay? And here's what Ephesians 5 says. It says this: as the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and his mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So again, I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Okay? In this one passage, you see three core fundamental traits that you need to build in your marriage. The first one applies to both husbands and wives, and it's simply this. It's you need to strive to become one as God intended. All right? And if you look at the scripture here, it says, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Okay? Our goal in a marriage, our thing that we should be striving for, is to become one. With that said, what that means is you have to eliminate as many things as you possibly can that make you two. You are not an individual when you are in a marriage. You are a couple. And the problem we have today in a lot of our marriages is people go in thinking they're still individuals and want to live their individual lives within the context of marriage. And that is just a recipe for disaster. Most of the time, that is not going to lead to a healthy marriage or a successful marriage because you see yourselves as individuals, and you aren't. When you get married, you become a couple, all right? And you become one entity, because this is why. The things you do and the things you decide to do no longer just affect you as an individual. They affect your spouse as well. You are a couple. You are one. Your decisions just don't apply to you anymore. Your decisions apply to both of you. So the things you do, the damage you do, the choices you make, your spouse is making the same choices and has to deal with the repercussions that you choose, and vice versa. So you have to strive to understand we need to become one. One of the hesitancies I have when I am interviewing people who are having marriage difficulties or the counseling stuff before they're married is that people, this is red flag number one, the people who have different bank accounts. And after they get married, they still have different bank accounts. And I just go, you're just setting up for yourselves, you're different individuals. You're not one. And what it means is you're guarded. I don't have full trust in this relationship to put our stuff together and pool it, because I'm already thinking about where it might lead down the road. And you have to be very careful of those things. Another things we have is the women, you have your ladies, and the guys, you have your guys. And in a lot of relationships, what it comes down to, I want to be with my guys and I don't need to ask my wife. Or I want to be with the ladies and I don't need to ask my husband, I'm just going to go out with them. Well, here's the deal. You're not an individual anymore. You got married. You're a couple. You need to talk to your spouse before you go do individual things and make sure they're good with it and you work out the details and things work out. It doesn't mean you can't have a ladies' night. It doesn't mean you can't have a guys' night. It doesn't mean you can't have those friends and hang out with them. What it means is it's no longer you just doing what you want to do. It's you working with your spouse, making sure you're both comfortable with what you're doing. Does that make sense? That's the first thing that Paul lays down for you is you have to understand when you get married, you are to become one. And then he says this, he says it's kind of a mystery. but it's an illustration of the way that Christ and the church are one. And he goes, we can't fully comprehend how it is, but that's what God's design for marriage was, is a man would leave to go be with his wife, they would get married, and they would cease to be two individuals and they'd become one. The hope here is when you look at like a marriage of mine and Autumn's, we have a lot of issues. But when you see us and you interact with us, we are one. Okay? We don't often make decisions without consulting each other. If you ask me to do something, usually you will hear me say, well, I got to check with Autumn first and we'll check that stuff out. Why? Because we're one. And I have to understand my decisions affect her life and her decisions affect my life. Do I do that perfectly? Obviously not. I already shared that with you some. Okay? But that is what you strive for, is becoming one. Now, the second fundamental, which I call 2A. This one is to husbands. And here's what we see in the passage here. Is husbands, you need to learn how to convince your wives that you love her. The way it says it here is it says, so again, I say each man must love his wife as he loves himself. Now, I'm very specific in my terminology I use here, all right? There are two key things here. Number one, husbands, you need to learn. So let me stop there. To be able to love your wives, it's a learning process. Those of you that are husbands here, how many of you learned perfectly how to love your wife already? There's this book called, I think, The Love Dare, Stephen, that I referenced earlier that might help you. Okay. Here's the thing. Learning how to love your wife is a learning process. I don't know anyone who's totally perfected it except Jim Porter. Jim Porter tries to convince me all the time that he has, but I know he hasn't because his wife's in my Sunday school class every week. So he's a good husband. I'm not saying he's not a good husband. I'm just saying he's not perfect at it all. But here, oh, is he, Sue? He is? Okay, good. She said yes, Jim. Yeah, good job there. But here's the thing. Husbands, you have to continually learn at it. You know when you didn't get it right, do you not? Yeah, we all know. I won't have you raise your hands. You know when you don't get it right, and you know you need to learn differently the next time. You need to learn how to love your wife. And then I'm very specific with this word. You need to learn how to convince your wife that you love her. This is intentional. Let me tell you why I use the word convince. Not using the word convince in order to think that you have to trick her into it or convince her of something that's not real. What you have to understand, men, is this. What we think conveys love to our wife, our wives don't always interpret as love. And this is where most marriages get it wrong, is they try to love the way they think love is going to be received by their wife, and then their wife doesn't receive it as love, and then you go, I just did this for you, and all I'm getting back is this, and it leads to conflict and a bashing of heads, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. Because as a husband, you sit there going, I did this, I'm trying to show you love, or they will say, you don't love me, and you're going, I did this. How can you say I don't love you? And you're like, well, you don't do this and this, and you don't. You have to learn how to convince them. So it's not about you being convinced going, I'm doing my part. It's more about, does your spouse feel like you love them? And that's more important than if you think you're doing it right. You need to find out, how did I receive love? How can I convince them that I actually love them? Men, here would be my one small piece of advice that I have picked up on. Again, not that I'm perfect at this, all right? But I have picked up on this. Men, we need to focus on the small things instead of just big, large things, okay? From what I have noticed in general, this is a generality, women want you to notice all the little things that they do and that they take care of and show them appreciation and love for those little things. And if you do that on a regular basis, like multiple times a day, at least once a day, you notice the little things and do the little things, they will be convinced that you love them. Men, we typically think more big scale, and I do one big act like every 3 months, and they know I love them. It doesn't work that well, okay? I did this last time I talked on marriage. I did a survey, and I just said, women, how many of you would rather receive a dozen roses at one point, or would rather receive one rose for 12 straight weeks from your husband? And I had them raise their hand, and literally every woman went, I would rather have the one rose for 12 straight weeks. Why? They don't care about the big thing because it's just over and done with. They like the little things and constantly being reminded that you love them. So that would be my word of advice. How that works out in your marriage, I don't know, because all of our marriages are different. But you need to look for the little, and you need to appreciate it and remind them that you love them and you're thankful for those little things. And your wife would understand and be more convinced that you love them than when you just do some big things every 3 to 4 months. Or once a year on the anniversary, and that's when you do the big thing to remind them that you love them. It's not going to work out well for you. Okay? So men, we are called to love our wives. Now, 2B, which is the wives. This one doesn't get covered as much in culture. It doesn't get talked about because wives, you hear the same thing we talk about to the men, which is you got to love your husband. Men don't want to be loved. Well, we do, but it's not our biggest thing. Okay? The biggest thing that keeps us happy in our marriage is not feeling like you love us the way that you think about it. What we see from the scriptures is this: wives, you need to learn how to convince your husband you respect them. All right? The scriptures say here, and the wife must respect her husband. Men and women are different. Our DNA is different. How we act is different. Our emotions are different. In general, we are drastically different from each other. And what men are always looking for is respect. And they want to feel like their wife respects them. And so women, wives, what you have to learn is how do you show respect to your husband? How is it that they feel and they get convinced that you respect them? Now, here's what I have noticed. Women, you do a really poor job of this. Okay? You might look at your husband and go, he doesn't do a good job of loving. Wives, you don't do a good job of showing respect to your husband. And I don't like the word showing respect because it makes you think like bowing down. Let me say it this way. You do a poor job convincing your husband that you respect him. And if he is not convinced that you respect him, you will have a much more grumpy husband who's willing to fight and get ready to fight with you at the drop of a hat. I've said this a lot of times. You've probably had this experience in your marriage. You say something you think is sweet and great, and your husband just snaps and goes off. Wives, how many of you have this happen? And you're going, what just happened? The reason is you just did something that made your husband feel like he's not respected, that you don't respect him, and that goes straight to the core of his heart, because men typically are not as emotional, all right? So whether you emotionally love us, we can get over that. It's not that big of a deal. If we feel like you don't respect us, we get ticked off very quick and we get very defensive. The same thing for a wife. If you feel like your husband didn't respect you or something, you can get over that. You can move on. But if you feel like he doesn't love you, it weighs on you constantly. And it's all you can think about is my husband doesn't love me, all right? So ladies, you have to learn how to convince your husband you respect them. Here would be my word of advice on that one. Ladies, you need to focus on big picture things rather than the little things. It's the total opposite of what I told the men. Ladies, you need to look at the big picture of what your husband does and what he's done and tell him how much you respect him and how good you think he is at those things. And sometimes hold your tongue on a daily basis of the things you think he's failing at on a daily basis. All right? Wives, I'm speaking in generalities. Okay, so forgive me if you have a tendency to nitpick everything on a daily basis and little things that don't mean as much and forget to look at the big picture. So, let me put this into a realistic thing, how this works. You have a husband and wives, you'll sit there and go, my husband's great with the kids. He's a great father. But on a daily basis, what you'll do is like, did you go get the kids? Why didn't you get the kids to go do that? Why? I told you to go get the kids to do that one. And he hears 15 of those things in a day, and once every 3 to 4 months, you remind him how much you think he's a great father. Do you think a husband feels like they're respected at that point and you respect them? No, I'll tell you what a man hears. A man hears 15 times a day, I'm a bad father, I'm a bad father, I'm a bad father, I'm a bad father. You never intend to imply that to him. That's all he hears. So when you tell him the once every 3 months he's a good dad, that's one compiled against 185 times I've heard I'm a bad one. That makes sense. Now, ladies, you're going to sit there and go, that doesn't make sense and that's not even rational. It doesn't matter. You have to convince your husband that you respect him. Us men can look and go, why would you not like the 12 roses and you want one for 12 weeks? That makes no sense to me. Why not the big 12? We think differently. But that's how we're created. We have to figure out how to communicate that to our spouses. So ladies, you got to focus on big picture things and hold your tongue some on the daily things. I'm not telling you on every daily thing. What I'm telling you is us men will constantly annoy you. It's what we do. It's in our makeup. We annoy you. We're like big boys, big kids. We like to play around. That's just what we are. We're going to annoy you. And sometimes you just have to hold your tongue and go, that's part of the big package of, he's a really good husband. He's a really good father. And I need to let him know those things more than I let him know on a daily basis. You really bug me on some of those things. Be happy that you have them and that they are good at the big picture things overall. They will annoy you, but you still love them. All right? If you would do that, you would help convince your husband that he's respected, and you would have a much more happy husband. You would have a husband that would do a lot more to little things, and he would just naturally start doing those things because he'd be happier, looking to help out and do things around the house and do things with the kids because they will live up to the standards you put before them. That makes sense. That's what we see in the scriptures. What we see from Paul is this: we are not created equal. Ladies, you want love. Men, we want respect. We are different. That's okay. But ladies, you have to learn how to convince your husband that they're respected, and men, you have to learn how to convince your wives that you love them. And if you can carry that off in a marriage, you can have a successful marriage. So here's the deal. Marriage can be difficult. Marriage can be messy a lot of times. But if you build your marriage on the fundamentals that God, the creator of the universe, one who created us and designed marriage, if you would build your marriage on those fundamentals that he's laid out, any marriage can become a successful marriage. Whether you feel like, man, we married wrong personalities, if God's at the center of it and you follow God's principles and his fundamentals, you can still have a successful marriage. Me and my wife are a perfect example of that. We've had 20 successful years of marriage, and I would say overall a happy marriage, even though it's been really rough a lot of times. But it's been successful because God's at the center of it. Just remember, there is no winner and there is no loser in your marriage. Either you will win together or you will lose together. You can't have in a marriage where one person's a winner and one's a loser. It doesn't work that way. Either you will be losers or you will be winners. And my last thing to you would be this: Christians, those of us that are married to a fellow Christian, we have a huge obligation, we have a huge responsibility in the culture we live in today to have successful marriages. You know how much the marriage realm has disintegrated in our culture over the last 40 to 50 years. Okay? We have children growing up everywhere that do not have fathers, that do not have marriage relationships to look up to and see and model, and even just naturally know what a godly marriage looks like. We are the last line of defense. The government will never fix marriage. Okay? No community group will ever fix marriage. The only ones that have the answers to fix marriage is God, and we are his followers. And we have a responsibility to have successful marriages. So in a decaying culture, there's a light shining there for them to look up to. One of the main purposes, I said this, is why we have moved down here into East Tulsa and left Owasso, is we realize that same thing. In spite of everything we have in our lives, we have a stable, successful marriage. And these neighborhoods need to see those around. That's why we're here. Because we, not for the other couples, for the children, to go, that's what a good marriage looks like. And we want them to see that we want them to see kids that grow up in a stable, good marriage. So Christians, take it seriously. This can't be a sermon that you look at and go, yeah, my marriage is kind of a mess right now, and we kind of just coexist, and we get it, and I'm okay with that, and that's just how we'll live. No. As Christians, you are obligated to work things out and to become the marriage that God desires for you to have, and to become a successful marriage in his eyes. Because through that, you can change a world. You can change a generation. You can change a community. You can change so many people's lives just by the marriage relationship you have. And that's what I would encourage you to focus on, is becoming one together so that people see Jesus through your relationship with your husband or your wife. Would you pray with me?